What I'm about to share with you today is one of the most disturbing cases to ever emerge from Scotland. Not just because of the sheer brutality of what happened, but because of how deceptively normal everything seemed in the beginning. This is a story about trust, about compassion, and about how darkness can hide behind the most ordinary faces. This is the story of Phoenix Spencer Hoen. Phoenix was just 21 years old when her life was stolen from her. Born in 2003, she was the youngest of 4 children. Growing up in the quiet Scottish town of Straven in South Lanarkshire, her parents, Alison and Graham, worked hard to build a loving home, one filled with warmth, values, and a sense of security. But Phoenix was different from the start. Not just because of her looks, though she was beautiful. It was her spirit, that quiet compassion she carried with her everywhere. She had this incredible ability to sense when someone was struggling, and she would step in to help without ever being asked. At Straven Academy, teachers remembered her as hardworking. Yes, but more than that, they remembered her presence. She made everyone feel seen. She had this humor, this empathy, the kind that lifted everyone around her. After finishing school, Phoenix stepped into adulthood with determination. She worked at the local Straven Hotel, and later at a cafe, where locals swore she made the best coffee in town. To her colleagues, she wasn't just an employee. She was adored, respected, and deeply missed whenever she wasn't around. Outside of work, Phoenix's life was simple but sweet. She cherished time with her family. She loved music, long countryside walks, and like many young people her age, she embraced TikTok, filling her page with joyful snippets of her life. Ice cream runs with friends, golden hour selfies, silly moments with her siblings. These glimpses painted a picture of a young woman full of life, laughter, and love. But it was around this time, while balancing her job, shaping her future, and enjoying her freedom, that Phoenix met a man named Yuan. At first glance, Yuan came across as reserved, even gentle. He wasn't someone who sought the spotlight. Behind closed doors, he gave off this softer, thoughtful side, one that seemed to draw Phoenix in. Yuan was 27 years old at the time, and like Phoenix, he had grown up in Straven, just a few miles from East Kilbride. He lived there with his family, went to local schools, and eventually settled into adulthood with a steady job as a postman for Royal Mail. On the surface, it was the kind of quiet, dependable work that suggested stability, and by all accounts, he did it well. To most people who only knew him casually, Yuan seemed sociable, popular even, though perhaps a little shy. But there was another side to him, one that wasn't always visible in day-to-day interactions. Neighbors remembered fleeting moments when his charm slipped away, replaced by sudden flashes of anger and a sense of coldness in his eyes that left people uneasy. And for anyone who had stumbled across his social media during his teenage years, the signs were even harder to dismiss. From the age of 14 through 18, Yuan had littered his online pages with disturbing posts. The tone was violent, angry. There weren't just one or two of these messages, there were dozens. Post after post revealed a teenager who seemed consumed by violence and ego. He even bragged online about being a local drug dealer. At one point, he called himself an occasional porn star. In another entry, he boasted about how anger made him feel tingly and agitated. Although these posts were eventually deleted, they weren't forgotten by those who had seen them. His online persona had revealed a darkness within, a side many brushed off as just a phase. But in hindsight, it raised far too many red flags. By his 20s, however, the past seemed buried. Yuan kept his head down at work, quietly delivering the mail. Colleagues said he rarely drew attention to himself, never complained, simply got on with the job. On the surface, he looked like he had left a troubling phase behind. But appearances, as we know, can be deceiving. It was sometime in late 2022 when Phoenix first crossed paths with Yuan. The two apparently met at a family gathering. She was only 20 at the time. He had just turned 25. At first glance, they couldn't have seemed more different. Phoenix was bright, bubbly, full of life. Yuan was quiet, reserved, an observer more than a participant. But sometimes, it's those contrasts that drew people together. Friends remembered Phoenix as gentle, funny, fiercely loyal, the type of person who could sense exactly when someone needed a hug or a kind word. And in many ways, it seemed like her warmth balanced out Yuan's more withdrawn nature. On paper, they looked like a good match. She was studying while working part-time. He had a steady job. Together, they seemed like a young couple with their lives ahead of them. Phoenix brought a spark into Yuan's world. She encouraged him to try new things, brought him out of his shell, and gave him a sense of belonging. And at least in the beginning, Yuan played the role of an attentive boyfriend well. Her family liked him. Her friends described him as loving, even doting, and Phoenix herself seemed over the moon. She often spoke about how much she loved him. From the outside, the relationship looked happy and secure. It wasn't long before the couple moved in together, renting a small flat in East Kilbride. They celebrated birthdays, took photos together, visited family almost every week. To those around them, they looked just like another couple figuring life out. But behind closed doors, it wasn't quite simple. Over time, subtle changes began to creep in. It started small, offhand criticisms, bouts of moodiness, sulking when things didn't go his way. Then came the jealousy, not just over Phoenix's friends or who she spoke to, but even over her job and the way she dressed. Being the deeply empathetic person she was, Phoenix tried to calm him, reassure him, smooth things over. But the cracks in their relationship only widened. His insecurities deepened, and soon his moods became volatile. Phoenix never made a public scene about it, but she did begin quietly opening up to close friends. She admitted that things were no longer working, and by the middle of 2024, she had made up her mind. She wanted space. She was ready to move on. But Yuan didn't take the rejection well. Instead of accepting her decision, he leaned on excuses. He claimed he wasn't really a bad person at all, just a victim of cocaine, steroids, and alcohol. He insisted that once he got those addictions under control, everything would change. But instead of seeking real help, Yuan used his vices as a shield, a way to excuse his behavior without ever fixing it. Patient as ever, wanted to believe him. By November of 2024, the two had been living together for nearly 2 years. But Yuan wasn't getting better. If anything, his substance abuse was worsening. His volatility was growing, and his need for control over Phoenix was tightening. He felt stuck in a job he saw as mundane, stagnant, going nowhere, and at the same time, he was trapped in his own circles of dependency. Safe to say, Phoenix never should have put up with this. But tragically, it was her compassion, her kindness, and her endless patience that kept her by his side. And ultimately, it would lead her straight into betrayal. The date was Saturday, November 16, 2024. For Phoenix, the evening began like so many others. She had finished her shift at Straven Hotel and then headed back to the flat she shared with Yuan. Earlier that day, Yuan had spent the afternoon alone. He had texted her saying he was feeling lonely. Phoenix, being who she was, responded with warmth, assuring him that they would be together soon. Later that night, the two of them sat down to take away dinner in front of the TV. To anyone looking in, it was just another quiet night at home. Two young people winding down after a long week. At 9:37 p.m., Phoenix messaged her mother. It was short and casual, just letting her know that she and Yuan were having dinner. Nothing about it suggested that anything was wrong. But only a few hours later, everything would change. Just after midnight, neighbors reported hearing loud noises, hurried footsteps, pounding above them, the kind of energy that felt off, unsettling, out of place, on an otherwise ordinary weekend night. But then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The noises faded, silence settled over the flat, and that silence extended to Phoenix's phone. Calls and messages went unanswered. The rest of the night passed quietly. The flat remained dark, and Phoenix's phone stayed silent. By the following morning, when Phoenix still hadn't replied her mother, Allison began to feel uneasy. She sent her daughter another message asking if she was okay. This time, she did receive a reply, but it didn't sound like Phoenix. The message read, "Sorry, I've just woken up." It was short, flat, and out of character. Yuan also reached out to Allison, claiming that he and Phoenix had simply been drinking the night before and that Phoenix was still asleep. Again, this didn't sound like her, but the family, trying not to overreact, brushed it off. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe she needed a day to herself. But when Phoenix failed to show up for her shift at the hotel on Monday, November 18th, her family knew something was very wrong. Phoenix wasn't the type to miss work without a reason. Worried sick, they contacted the authorities. An investigation was about to begin. Police arrived at the flat at around 10 minutes past 12 p.m. that Monday afternoon. The goal was simple: find Phoenix and make sure she was safe. When they knocked on the door, it was Yuan who answered, calm, collected, almost unnervingly quiet, just as those who knew him had often described. He didn't resist, didn't seem panicked. Instead, he invited the officers inside. But the moment they stepped through the door, everything changed. The metallic scent of copper hit them instantly, a smell that every seasoned officer recognizes. And as they entered the living room, what they found was nothing short of horrifying. Lying in the center of the room was the naked body of a young woman. Her body had been partially covered with a tea towel. It was Phoenix. She had suffered unimaginable injuries. Her head had been severed and placed upright beneath her left arm, beside her torso. The scene was gruesome, chaotic, and disturbingly intimate. As officers searched the flat, they discovered 2 bloody knives near her body, and a third also stained inside the bedroom. It quickly became clear that Yuan had attempted to dismember her. But perhaps the most chilling part of all was Yuan himself. Throughout the discovery, he remained eerily composed, answering every question the officers asked, almost as if the situation didn't faze him. When detectives asked why he did it, his response was disturbingly matter-of-fact. He said, couldn't stay in the flat with a full body. That was why he tried to dismember her. There was no emotion in his voice, no panic, no guilt. Just a flat, hollow calm that left the investigators horrified. And when an officer mentioned his future, Yuan simply shrugged off and said, I guess this is what my next 25 years look like. He was promptly arrested on the spot. Forensic teams soon stood off the scene, methodically documenting every inch of that small East Kilbride flat. They examined the knife positions, the layout of the room, the extent of Phoenix's injuries. The autopsy later revealed that Phoenix had been stabbed more than 20 times, many of those wounds aimed at her face. But it was a single stab to the chest that proved fatal. What those investigators saw that day would stay with them forever. A young woman full of light and love, brutally silenced by the very person she once trusted the most. Even after his arrest, Yuan couldn't stop talking. He told officers that he had blacked out during a drug-fueled episode, blaming a toxic mix of steroids, cocaine, and alcohol for what he had done. He didn't deny the murder, not once. Instead, he tried to frame himself as a broken man, fractured by addiction and emotion. But this wasn't the first time he had admitted to killing Phoenix. Just moments before police arrived at his door, Yuan had called 999 himself. And on that call, his tone was disturbingly calm. When the operator asked what had happened, he said plainly that he had murdered his girlfriend. When they asked if he was sure she was dead, his response was chilling. I know she's dead, mate. She's dead. I even tried to dismember her. According to his own statements and the forensic evidence, the attack happened just after midnight. There was no warning, no argument that anyone could recall hearing. Yuan simply decided to kill her. He lunged at Phoenix, strangled her, and then stabbed her again and again, more than 20 times. At 12:13 a.m., a downstairs neighbor reported hearing loud bang, followed by frantic footsteps above. By then, Phoenix was already gone. What happened next was almost beyond comprehension. Alone in that flat, Yuan carried Phoenix's body to the bathroom. He took 3 knives from the kitchen, and then, in an act of pure horror, severed her head. The home they had shared for nearly 2 years was now unrecognizable, silent except for the sound of his pacing footsteps. There was no cries for help, no remorse, no cause to save her, only stillness, and the body left mutilated on the floor. When Phoenix's family began to worry the next morning, Yuan picked up her phone and pretended to be her. He texted her mother as if everything was fine. All the while, Phoenix's body lay lifeless only a few feet away. And as horrifying as that is, what Yuan did next somehow made it even worse. Throughout that Sunday, from 8 a.m. until 7 p.m., he used Phoenix's phone to watch explicit content. Not once or twice, but over 170 times. For 10 hours straight, he sat in that flat, hundreds of videos, while the woman he had murdered lay beside him. It's almost impossible to comprehend that level of depravity. At one point, during this binge, he even paused to order more drugs before going right back to what he was doing. That wasn't a man in shock. This was a man completely consumed by darkness. Surveillance cameras around town later captured Hoen behind the wheels of Finis' car. It appeared that he had left the flat at least once, most likely to find local drug dealers and perhaps even look for ways to dispose of evidence. Whatever his reason, one thing was clear. Hoen was making deliberate, calculated moves to distance himself from what he had done, while chasing yet another high. Meanwhile, concern for Finis was growing rapidly. When she didn't show up for work at the Straven Hotel the next day, her colleagues reached out to her parents, and that was the moment everything began to unravel. Already suspicious and uneasy, Finis' mother, Alison, called the police. That single phone call, combined with Hoen's own 999 confession, finally brought his horrifying chain of events to an end. Hoen's arrest marked the beginning of a complex and deeply disturbing investigation. And while he had already admitted to killing Finis, both in person and over the phone, detectives still had to reconstruct the entire sequence of events. Forensic teams spent hours inside the flat, documenting every detail, every stain, every weapon. Meanwhile, Finis' family received the devastating news that her body had been found. From that moment on, their world would never be the same again. Just 2 days later, Hoen appeared in court for the first time. He was charged with murder, with attempting to defeat the ends of justice. He offered no plea, no explanation, and no apology. The brutality of the case meant it was immediately escalated to the High Court in Glasgow. In the months that followed, prosecutors began to build one of the most disturbing cases Scotland had seen in years. They gathered autopsy reports, digital forensics, witness statements, detailed crime scene analysis, and each one painting a clearer picture of the unimaginable violence that had taken place inside that small apartment. The trial for the murder of Spencer Hoen began months later at the High Court in Glasgow. From the very first day, it was clear that this case would haunt everyone who heard it. Prosecutors described in painful detail the sheer brutality of what had taken place inside that small apartment. They spoke of Finis' injuries, the mutilation, the senselessness of the attack. The jury listened in silence as forensic specialists walked them through the evidence, the blood patterns, the timestamps, the digital trail that left no room for doubt. But even as the prosecutors laid out their case, Hoen showed almost no emotion. He sat there, quiet, expressionless, and detached. The same calmness that had shocked police officers during his arrest seemed to linger throughout the proceedings. His defense team tried to argue that his actions were fueled by substance abuse, that a mixture of alcohol, steroids, and cocaine had pushed him into a state of psychosis. They painted him as a man who had lost control, but the evidence showed something very different. This wasn't a momentary lapse. It was deliberate, sustained, and cold. On May 12, 2025, after weeks of testimonies, the jury returned their verdict. Guilty of murder and guilty of attempting to defeat the ends of justice. When the sentences was handed down, the courtroom fell silent. Hoen Campbell was ordered to serve a minimum of 22 years before being eligible for parole. The judge described the killing as one of the most callous, depraved, and senseless acts of violence the court had ever seen. Finis' family sat in the gallery, holding each other tightly as the sentence was read out. For them, there was no sense of closure, just the heavy weight of loss. Her mother, Alison, later said that while justice had been served, no amount of years would ever be enough to bring her daughter back. Outside the court, the case sent shockwave across Scotland. Finis had been known as kind, hardworking, and full of potential. A young woman who saw the best in everyone, even in the person who would ultimately destroy her. Her story became a heartbreaking reminder of the dangers of unchecked anger, substance abuse, and emotion.